Left-wing firebrand, now Venezuela's president for another 6 years. A vast crowd defying heavy rain to salute their leader, who described his victory as another defeat for the empire of Mr. Danger, his nickname for George W. Bush.
This is another defeat for the devil who tries to dominate the world. Venezuela is independent and free. It will never be a North American colony.
Earlier, Mr. Chavez arrived at the polls in a souped-up VW Beetle. The man who controls what may be the world's biggest oil reserves outside the Middle East, a showman to his fingertips. His landslide victory declared fair by foreign observers after a largely peaceful vote. Manuel Rosales, the candidate of big business and the wealthy, conceding without the usual declarations of vote rigging. With Venezuela's poor barrios buoyed up by free welfare handouts, the backbone of Chavez support. The president doling out billions in record oil revenue in exchange for political loyalty. And though crime is still a major issue here, Mr. Chavez's common touch, rare in Venezuelan politics, easily winning the day. Ooh, Chavez isn't leaving, they shouted, and they may be more right than they know. For last week, Mr. Chavez, closest ally of Cuba's ailing Fidel Castro, suggested he would ask for the constitution to be changed, allowing him to run for president as often as he likes. His re-election today welcomed by another ally, Iran, another petrostate vehemently opposed to American interference. But despite his famously confrontational anti-Bush rhetoric, Mr. Chavez is likely to carry on selling oil to his biggest market, the United States.
Even though his policies may create some uncertainty and make some investors afraid of the country, but for the time being, I don't believe he will push something like a communist regime in Venezuela.
For in reality, last night's election capped an inconclusive year in Latin American politics. Peru, Colombia and Mexico voting in pro-American presidents. Bolivia, Nicaragua and Ecuador moving left. Venezuela undoubtedly more socialist than Brazil or Chile. Yet it's an irony that the leader of the fastest growing economy on the continent is almost entirely dependent on America's thirst for oil.
Jonathan. This week's guest of Mayor Ken Livingstone was Venezuela's fiery President Hugo Chavez. After the speeches, he was on to lunch with the cream of London's left-wing literary set, who lapped up details of the president's self-styled socialist revolution. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, reports.
Un asesino, un genocida, un inmoral.
An assassin, a committer of genocide, an immoral person. President Hugo Chavez describing George Bush today and protesting about being compared to his nemesis. It's not true, he says, that you're either with Hugo Chavez or against him. But his followers are pretty passionate. It's a long time since the left has been this excited. Now they're heroes visiting London, and they seem to think, well, you're either with him or against him.
He's saying there is a different way. We don't have to privatise, we don't have to sell off, we don't have to follow IMF diktats. You can actually redistribute wealth.
The tragedy is that there are no politicians like him left in Europe. I mean, here, you barely have a choice in terms of policy. In Venezuela, the people have a very clear choice. Either they're with Chavez or they're with the oligarchy.
President Chavez is in London as a guest of the Mayor, Ken Livingstone, on a private visit.
You are not seeing Tony Blair.
He was unimpressed when asked why he was not meeting the Prime Minister.
Please, excuse me, but from what I can see, you are a journalist of some experience. And you ask such a stupid question. I'm not saying you're stupid, but your question is stupid.
What Hugo Chavez is doing in Venezuela is not stupid. This cooperative making shoes is one of the many projects he's started to help the poor, trying to redistribute the millions Venezuela is reaping from high oil prices. The question is, though, can such projects be sustained?
The danger is that when the money runs out, or when Chavez loses an election, or when he's overspent, or when the oil price comes down, there won't be any left, and so it could end in tears.
And so to Parliament, after promising to provide cut-price heating oil to Britain's poor. The Americans today imposed arms sanctions on Venezuela, saying Hugo Chavez wouldn't cooperate on terrorism. They hate his closeness to Iran and Cuba.
We'll do as you say, we'll stand over here and get the photos.
But here in London, he was amongst friends, who maybe wished that they too were on the front line.
All right, do you want to shake in hands or what?
Against the imperialistas and capitalistas in Washington.
That's it.
Joined now live by our Washington correspondent Jonathan Rugman. Jonathan, one's surprised to find America was selling any arms any longer to Venezuela. Why ban them now?
Well, I think this is turning into one of those epic Cold War spats between two governments which clearly loathe one another. The Venezuelans recently bought 100,000 Kalashnikovs from the Russians, and they're planning to make Kalashnikovs in Venezuela itself. The Americans aren't happy about this. This is all about spheres of influence. They fear that Chavez is the new Castro. They're also concerned that Venezuela was the only country, along with Syria and Cuba, to support Iran at the IAEA recently. And I think the Americans want to send a message to Europe in particular, where Chavez obviously is at the moment,